All right. Looks like we're live now, so I'll give it a second for everyone to join. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the panel on environmental justice barriers and solutions pathways, learning from community leaders. We want to thank everyone for their time today. We are joined here by leaders from the Navajo Nation, uh, the river parishes in Louisiana, and Ironbound in Newark. This panel will actually go over, um, sorry, some of the barriers that these leaders in their various different areas and pathways where funding can be more accessible to them in their. We're just going to go briefly around the room here and do some introductions. So I'll start with Phil's on the top left of my screen. Phil.
Hi, everyone. My name is Phil Jordan. I'm the Vice President of BW Research Partnership, and we're working closely with the Clean Air Task Force and these environmental justice leaders on strategies and insights on perceptions of climate justice, on environmental justice and climate equity. And it's a pleasure to be here today and continue to do this work with these incredible environmental justice leaders. So why don't I turn it over next maybe to Ms. Sharon for introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharon Levine, and I'm the director and founder of Rise St. James in St. James, Louisiana, fighting the petrochemical facilities and from coming into our community, and also fighting to keep the ones that's there, to keep them from expanding. And I'll turn it over to Peter.
Good afternoon. My name is Pete Etzity, and I am from Navajo, from the Shiprock town of Shiprock, New Mexico, Navajo Nation. For those of you, we typically introduce ourselves traditionally, so I'm not Odene Tuachini Nishlin, Oantlane, Bashashin, Torachini, Dashache, Oze Tuachini, Dashanella. So basically, what I did is just tell you a little bit about my background and my four clans, and typically that's you would get an idea of where I come from. So currently, I serve as a senior tribal government relations manager with P&M Resources. So I'm really proud to be part of this panel, and just proud to have had that collaboration with the Clean Air Task Force and also the Climate Equity Project. So thank you. I'm glad to be here today.
And I'll pass it on to Maria.
And I'll turn it over. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm Maria Lopez Nunez. I'm with the Ironbound Community Corporation in Newark, New Jersey. Our Four Square Mile neighborhood has 3 power plants, a garbage incinerator, sewage waste treatment, Superfund sites. So we're just at the hands of industry here, but we're fighting back, and it's a pleasure to be in the company of these other communities because I know all our work is connected.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm Desmond Johnny. I'm from the Clean Air Task Force. I serve as our community engagement associate as part of our climate equity program. I'm just going to start off this discussion with, just to kind of get a little bit more information so everyone kind of is more aware of what you guys are doing. Can you each briefly share, speaking to the EJ leaders, a bit of the background and the work you've been doing related to environmental justice in your communities? And we'll start at the top. We'll start with Pete, and we'll work our way down.
Okay. Again, and I appreciate the time. Part of my role with P&M Public Service Company in Mexico, and serving the role within the Tribal Government and Customer Engagement Department, we work with a number of communities within our area, which is in northwest New Mexico. And there are a number of communities that are in close proximity to several different industries, particularly coal generating facilities and mining facilities. Part of that is, of course, we've been seeing the Climate Equity Initiative folks come out to the community to see firsthand how these communities, have that relationship with coal-fired power plant facilities and the mining. Part of that, again, with regard to environmental justice, is the idea around here is knowing that there's this initiative of the Energy Transition Act that's occurred in New Mexico. And of course, there are certain timelines that are tied to that. The difficulty with communities within the Navajo Nation, there are a number of sub-government units that are tied to these operations just because of the revenue stream that's available. So again, part of that is knowing that overall there's a transition that's happening from an extraction type of operation activity, and also taking into consideration issues with climate concerns, globally, also locally. So again, part of that is where does that fit within the bigger picture, and also within what's been implemented as far as policy. But knowing that for a tribe like the Navajo Nation, they do rely quite a bit on natural resource extraction revenues to operate their government and their sub-government units. So again, that's a little bit of my experience with that, and knowing that there is a balance as we move forward as to how do we transition, but also taking into consideration a big factor that not only on the environmental side, are jobs and opportunities for our Native communities. So I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. And Maria, would you mind sharing to us about some of the work you guys are doing out there in the Ironbound?
Yes, of course. Yeah, with the Ironbound, given the large concentration of industry, one of our obviously our defining moments has been the passage of S232, the Cumulative Impacts Law, in trying to make sure that, first off, that the Department of Environmental Protections knows what an environmental justice community is, right? The communities that are directly impacted by industry. And there is important for us to highlight the connections between race and class in industry sightings, right? So our law says that if an industry is coming into an environmental justice neighborhood and they're going to increase the burden of pollution, that the Department of Environmental Protection must say no, right? It must say reject the permit. And so that shall deny has been incredibly important to us. It's been where we're really invested in trying to fight back against industry that thinks it can continue to just expand and pollute in our neighborhoods, and then start thinking not just on how we resist industry, but how we work with new industries that are forming, right? Because we do want to bring in clean energy and think about what a transition of the dirty grid might look like. I think we're widely misunderstood. I think that we're against progress. We're against bad progress, against racist progress that will continue sacrificing communities of color at the, in the name of the economy or in the name of even climate change mitigation. It all has to be rooted, I think, in justice, and thinking about who is directly impacted, because no part of our society should have to pay a different price, for the change we want to see in the world. It should be an equitable price and one that ends suffering in our communities. So I'll pass it back.
Yes, thank you so much, Maria. And Ms. Sharon, would you mind telling us about the environmental justice work and the background that you guys have been doing out there in the river parishes?
Well, I started doing this work in October of 2018, after our governor announced that a $9.4 billion plastic facility would be built 2 miles from my home. That didn't sit good with me at all and a bunch of my neighbors and friends. So we decided to fight this industry. And we already have 12 industries within a 10-mile radius where I live on the west bank of the Mississippi River. Before I started the work, I was in an organization called HELP, Humanitarian Enterprise of Loving People. I sat in that organization for 2.5 years and listened to the people complain about the industries that's coming in in the industries that's there already. One lady had a breathing machine that she came to the meeting with, and she had cancer. They didn't want to fight another industry that was trying to come in, because if this industry by the name of Formosa Plastics would be built in the 5th District in St. James Parish, we would not be able to breathe the air at all. We already having problems now breathing the air. We have problems drinking the water. The water is polluted, the air is polluted. We cannot make a garden anymore because the soil is polluted. So if Formosa Plastic was come to be built, they would have 14 industries within the big complex on 2,400 acres of land. That would be so much where we couldn't breathe the air. And the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, they give these permits to these industries, but they don't do the homework about seeing how much pollution there is there already before they grant these permits. So, and our parish officials are in the pockets of industry, just like LDEQ, and we don't have anyone to represent us to fight these industries, so we had to do it ourselves. And we've been doing a pretty good job of keeping out Formosa Plastics, and we're trying to keep out any other industries that's trying to come into the parish. We have another industry called DG Fuels. They're going to make jet fuels, and they want to be built in the 5th District also. And we're fighting that industry as I speak right now. And we're fighting our parish officials because they're the ones that vote. We can't vote. Our public officials vote for these industries. And so we're fighting, and we're going to New York this week coming up, and we're going to ask President Biden to declare this area a climate emergency because people are dying. And my friend Matt died yesterday from bone cancer. I have 2 brothers with cancer, and my girlfriend, she has liver cancer. We have a whole bunch of people with cancer as I speak. We have a funeral, maybe 2 or 3 funerals a week. We have a funeral last week. We had 2 last week. The week before we had 3. The week before we had 5. We are dying. So that's what's going on in my neighborhood. And that's why I'm fighting. And my organization is fighting also along with me.
Thank you so much, and I'm also sorry for your loss, Ms. Sharon. Phil is one of my colleagues that has been on the ground with me in all 3 of the communities that are represented currently on this in this call. Phil, can you kind of speak to what we've experienced and kind of what we've seen on the ground, and honestly the acceptance that we've felt in some of these communities? I also thank all you guys for being so open and welcoming to our, us coming in as a climate equity program here at Clean Air Task Force.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Desmond. And I'll just share a few observations from being able to spend time in the communities. And, the first, I think, is already evident in just what we've heard so far from these leaders, right? Which is when we think about environmental justice communities, I think it's easy to think about and hear about the challenges that exist in those communities, but it's also just as important, if not more important, to understand the strength that exists within those communities, the power that exists in those communities, and the actions that are happening within those communities from leaders who are rallying people really in life and death situations. And so it's hard as a researcher. You're really supposed to try to take a step back and remain neutral about everything. And we talk about it all the time. It's really hard to not become radicalized when you meet folks who are fighting the fights that the folks on this panel are fighting. So the first sort of observation is really, for groups that are looking to work in environmental justice communities and partner with environmental justice communities, is to lean into those strengths and really understand that there are people on the ground who have been doing this work for a long time, and that those experts are the ones that you need to really understand and work with. Also really important is that all communities are not the same. So there are some key themes that we've learned across different environmental justice communities. Some of those themes are: we want to stop pollution. We need more basic services. A lot of these communities are those where government has really sort of failed people in those communities. So a lot of the basic services that many Americans take for granted are not accessible to folks in these communities. And then, I think also in many of the communities, making jobs more accessible. So in some places there's lots of jobs, ironbound, there's help wanted signs up everywhere, but there's lots of obstacles and barriers to getting those jobs for folks. There's lots of jobs in the petrochemical plants in Miss Sharon's neighborhood, but those jobs are often not available to the local residents. And Navajo Nation has an unemployment rate approaching 50%. So obviously major challenges there. But the solutions, I think, are going to be really different. And so just to give a quick example, we heard about housing a lot in both the Ironbound and in Navajo Nation. But the challenges that exist around housing are really different and require really novel solutions. But the people on the ground, they have the ideas on how to fix the problems. We don't need outside experts to come in and tell you how to create new solutions. What we really need to do is empower the folks who have been doing this work for a long time to get the resources they need, to get in front of the folks they need to get in front of, to get those declarations made, and to really get all of government and the private sector and the NGOs really working in concert with them to make those solutions a reality. So it's been absolutely incredible, the welcome that we've received in the communities that we've gone to. It's been absolutely inspiring to see so many people working so diligently, again, as I said, to try to find the things that many people in this country take for granted. And I think we have a great opportunity now, while there's some new funding coming through and obviously lots of new attention being put on these issues, but we really have to make sure that it's implemented in a way that leans in on the strengths of these communities.
Thank you, Phil. And so for the panelists, I have a question as we kind of take that all in and we think about the issues that you guys face in your communities. From your perspective, what are the most pressing barriers that your communities face in achieving their goals in regards to environmental justice? We can start in any order.
I can go then. I think Phil touched on a couple of things with the visit here within the communities, local communities, and the Navajo Nation. Just to understand, folks that are out there, the Navajo Nation has a large land base and has a governmental structure, but it also has local government structures as well, which are broken up into 110 local chapter government units. So the example would be like 110 city governments or 110 county governments. Phil brought up one challenge in all of this is when you're looking at opportunities for development. One is the workforce. The workforce does exist, knowing that the population of the Navajo Nation members is over 400,000. But one of the challenges is housing and infrastructure, because when those things they don't exist where you can develop, so it limits capacity, meaning compared to a metro area nearby, it's just not attractive for a business or maybe even some sort of manufacturing opportunity. So what that does is it displaces individuals, so they'll seek opportunities elsewhere, maybe off of the Navajo Nation. That's one challenge. The other challenge, it's a good thing, and maybe there's a downside to it, is sovereignty. The Navajo Nation is a sovereign entity, just like the states, any of the 50 states in the United States. It's a sovereign entity that makes its own laws and conducts its business in such a way. But the thing about it is, the resources that are usually available, whether it's the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act, and just using that as an example, creates some resources and some options for possible development. But what typically happens is understand, if you understood the Navajo Nation government and how it functions and how complex it can be, it has its own bureaucratic process, but also the sovereign entity falls under somewhat the auspices or the authority of the federal government. So the Navajo Nation would still have to work with Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is under the Department of Interior. And you get into a whole other area of how approvals happen, whether it's for land withdrawals, other things like that, as far as reporting requirements. My experience is when the Navajo Nation receives federal funding, there are still strict requirements that make it really difficult compared to if it was resources or appropriations that were made directly, and maybe there was some flexibility to it. But a lot of times, the Navajo Nation is bound to the same reporting requirements and restrictions as any other program, such as health, public safety, social services. It really makes it difficult to utilize that source many times. So those are just a couple of challenges. And again, part of that is federal policy. It still exists, and it does create those challenges for tribes like the Navajo Nation. And I'll turn it back over.
Thank you. And Maria or Ms. Sharon?
Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, no problem. I said, I said from your perspective, what are the barriers that you face in your community with achieving your goals?
Yes, of course. I mean, there's a lot of barriers in my community, but I would say that a big barrier is regulation. There are good laws in the books, but they're not enforced. It is hard to hold companies accountable. I feel like we're left by ourselves to hold industry accountable, right? And so there shouldn't be that big of a separation between an agency and the community, because agency folks don't live in our community. Sometimes it smells so bad in my neighborhood, I can't open the windows. I have to close the windows, right? Because we have a fat rendering plant and a lot of chemical plants, and it's a nauseating situation. But the way that the regulations are set up, it's practically impossible that any industry would actually be fined from the impact that they're having on thousands of people at a moment, right? Whenever the incinerator is exceeding in emissions. So because agencies have been so inefficient, our communities sometimes struggle to even engage, because what's the point? We have so many other things to deal with. We're facing eviction, we're facing flooding, we're facing a bad school system, police brutality, immigration raids. That's our daily life. And then you add the fact that we can't even breathe. Kids don't want to go to the park. They know it's a bad park day, because it smells too strong to be out there. And all you're going to do is get a headache. You're going to end up throwing up. Kids stay home. Like, that's the life. Our life in our neighborhood is so different than I think what people have the right to have. We just don't have even clean air. And so it's not just about on us. We're making the best of a bad situation, but it is on at least the agencies who have protection in their name to do something about it, to start building that trust. And trust will only be built when there is enforcement, when we feel like our engagement leads to something, not leads to, more community engagement. I've stopped asking for community engagement. I want community decision-making, period, because having the conversation, folks hear our concerns, but nothing changes. That is very disheartening when there's so much that we're dealing with in our neighborhood. And when we flood, we don't just flood with water, we flood with toxic water. And so in an era of climate change, our barriers will only become magnified, right? Because let's take last year, Ida cut through the whole country. By the time it got to New Jersey, it did flood my neighborhood. My neighborhood looked like a river, right? And we have folks that live in basement apartments here. They lost everything, but FEMA doesn't consider them, valuable, because they don't own the home. They're tenants, I mean, 78% of my neighborhood is we rent. I rent. We don't own houses. So we have, that's a whole nother conversation. But because of that, FEMA was like, no disaster in Newark. We had to go and fight to be declared a disaster. But even then, oh, well, a lot of the things weren't eligible for a refund, right? So the system's definitely broken, and I'm not trying to fix it. I think it needs transformational change. And I don't want the focus to be on us as poor, helpless people. We're not helpless. We've been doing for ourselves and fighting for ourselves. I think it's actually agencies that need to have more honor and integrity in doing their jobs and holding industry accountable to lead us into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. And Ms. Sharon?
Our biggest challenge over here is our politicians, public officials, representative, senators. We have 7 council members, and they all are for industry. They vote in favor of industry, and we ask them not to, and they disregard us. They disregard our comments. And whenever we have a public hearing or public comment period, they might listen to it and they still vote in favor of industry. And we also have problems with LDEQ. We need fence line monitoring. We don't have that. When they have a monitor on the East Bank where there is no industry. And the monitors that we thought we would get, they told us that the data is not, they will not accept that data unless we have the frontline monitor that came from the federal government. So EPA came down and LDEQ, and they told us that we're going to get a monitor, a $407,000 monitor. We haven't gotten it yet, and that was over the summer. And we have to be the ones to tell them where we want the monitor placed. They haven't gotten back with us, so we don't know when the monitor is coming, and we don't know where they're going to put the monitor. So we're hoping that we still have a say-so in where to put this monitor, because I live 3 miles from an industry, and the pollution blows across the river and down by my house. And 5 o'clock in the evening, you sit outside on your front porch, you can smell it, the pollution, and you have to go back inside. And then we have a plant called Coke. Coke is a few miles from my house. People have children that can't go outside and play because of the smell. It makes you sick. It makes your stomach turn. It gives you a headache. And I do tours many times, a toxic tour, people that come from out of state, and sometimes they tell me their stomach hurt. And sometimes they tell me when they went back home, they had a headache. So what you think, we are living in this every day and breathing this air every day. And LDEQ don't monitor the plants like we think they should. We need to get either with the federal government or with our own state and ask them to let people be trained to go inside the plant to evaluate them to see if they're following the regulations, because LDEQ is not doing the job. I can promise you that. They are not doing it. So we need to get that from the federal government coming down to the states, especially Louisiana. And the parish, they do not get tax exempt money coming from the plants. It's called ITEP. They don't pay their fair share of taxes. If they would pay their fair share of taxes, it would be able to go to the schools, to the hospitals, to the police department. But the residents in this area have to pay property taxes when the plants are tax exempt. And I think that's not fair, because we've been living here all these years, and they come here and build in our community, and they give them a big bonus, an incentive to build here, while we are suffering. And we tell our parish officials we don't want them here, and they disregard what we think or what we say. They do what they want to do. And so far, we have kept out 3 industries from coming in St. James Parish. We kept Wan Chemical, South Louisiana Methanol, and Formosa Plastics. So Formosa Plastics, they are appealing it. Our judge ruled in our favor on all 10 counts, saying that it's our basic human rights to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And they disregard that, so they are appealing it, LDQ and Formosa. So that's our biggest challenge. We need laws changed to protect the people and not industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sharon. And you touched on some really great points, which brings me to my next question, actually. And Maria, you spoke on this as well. In your opinion, what are some key strategies or pathways to kind of overcome some of these barriers to advance the cause of environmental justice, especially when it comes to policy changes? As we all know, like you said, Ms. Sharon, LDQ has failed, Louisiana. There's other regulatory bodies that have failed, Newark, and also in your area, Peter, in the Navajo Nation. So we're going to kind of go run in the same order. So I'll start with you, Pete, if you want to tackle that question.
Okay. Thank you for the question. And again, with the Navajo Nation and the industry that surrounds the Navajo Nation, one of the things, to understand is one of the challenges is the status of the land. Navajo Nation land is trust land. So it really limits the possibility of one is home ownership. The other is, commercial development, because Navajo Nation is federal trust land. There is the unlikelihood of capital being made available through maybe a commercial loan. And again, that is a challenge for development because, investors typically look at opportunities and want to return. But in this case, with federal lands such as on Navajo, the land ownership really doesn't exist. It's more of a leasing process. So you get to use the land, but you can't own it. I think that's one challenge. I would say it would be a difficult lift as far as having that federal policy change to address that. On the flip side, if some examples of what could lead to a pathway, working for PNM and seeing some collaboration between a number of entities tied to PNM. The location where I'm at, the location was what was operating as San Juan Generating Station. Well, part of this site where I'm at, in a move by PNM, to look at creating something that's sustainable, as far as helping many tribal communities, which in this case is two: the Navajo Nation, Hickory Apache Nation, and one of the local communities south of here, 90 minutes, is transferring the water infrastructure of this, what was a power plant, to the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, which would then provide water or convey water to many Navajo communities 90 miles from here. I think that's one way to look at it in a positive sense is, the balance you take from the industry, how do you convert that? And now this is rededicated for this purpose. So part of that, I'm proud that, our company leadership looked at this and worked with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, worked with the Navajo Nation to see this through, and other entities that are also going to benefit this, which is the city of Gallup in New Mexico, which is hurting for water also. They're planning for the future. Again, you talk about capacity to provide those basic necessities for communities. The other that PNM has been a part of was the Light Up Navajo project, which is within the Navajo Nation. The Navajo Tribal Utility Authority had partnered with American Public Power Association. They call it a mutual aid initiative, and this is basically to provide power to many rural Navajo residents on the Navajo Nation. One of the things I go back to is collaboration. Is you have a lot of utilities from across the United States who have played a part in this, provided manpower, which is workers, equipment, and time to do this, to dedicate that and volunteer that to this project to connect many Navajo homes to the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority's utility system. And the reason why I bring it up is, it's such a rural community that the costs are so high. Example would be just to connect someone to the utility system could be anywhere from $40,000 to $50,000, and a lot of Navajos just can't afford that. Going back to what Phil had mentioned, is that unemployment rate is well over 50%. So you think about those things. If we can continue to move forward and seeing how we can work together, just to try to elevate tribal communities like the Navajo Nation in this way, and maybe we can build that capacity in some form and provide that opportunity. And you also minimize that challenge of Navajos wanting to live on Navajo and having the basic accesses to utilities, water, electricity, and other things, and maybe home ownership. So we want to keep our members here. So those are some examples of trying to get past some of these barriers and challenges. And I'll turn it back over.
Thank you so much, Pete. Maria, would you mind speaking to what are some key strategies and pathways to overcoming some of these barriers when it comes to policy changes or even community engagement?
Yeah. It has to go way beyond community engagement. It needs to, I said it before, it's enforcement. Enforcement is key because it's hard to even know what new laws we need when the laws that are on the books don't get enforced. When there's not really a penalty for a consistent violation of operational permits by industry. So I would love to see more enforcement, and then budgets going towards enforcement, right? Like in every agencies. It can't just be in one, but they need to actually take it seriously and build out that avenue of their work. I mean, there shouldn't be conflict of interest. I don't know how we avoid conflict of interest, but it does feel to me that if you go into, to serve the public as a public servant, that you should be banned from being able to take private industry jobs on the other side, because that back and forth between agencies and industry and how they share talents, it only harms the public. I don't see how that's appropriate. How, unless that's stopped, we'll ever be able to continue. And I think there has to be more transparency, right? Because I really was hearing what Ms. Sharon was saying, and I see it happen a lot in our communities where elected officials or consultation with elected official bypasses true community engagement. And I think that it could make sense if we were really democratic, right? If people really voted, if we could really hold elected officials accountable. But there has to be policy on the books that make community engagement have to be with the people who live there. And because it's difficult for agencies to enforce, for elected officials to avoid conflicts of interest, right? Even for the agencies to avoid conflicts of interest, then we need true community decision making, because communities will hold all the powers that be accountable. That I trust. I trust in the communities I work with, that we're not just, like I said, we're not just ignoring it. We're standing up for ourselves. So how do we get more community decision making into the process? Right? Because that'll help us all stay more accountable and keep our integrities if community stakeholders are actually at the decision-making tables. That's, I think would be my small offering.
Thank you so much, Maria. And Ms. Sharon, I'll let you go next.
Okay. When it comes down to policy makings, I think that the community should be involved. I think that they should let the community know what's going on before the policy is changed or revised. And I think that we should have a say-so in it because we live here. And I think that we need LDQ to regulate the industries and not just give them a pat on the back when something is wrong. For example, we have an industry over here called Nucor. They were polluting for years, and they came and told the public that they were polluting. LDQ gave them a fine of $86,000. That's a slap in the face. And I'm pretty sure they're still polluting because LDQ don't regulate them like they should. And these other plants over here still polluting. When you pass by these plants, there's a smell, and if you're talking, it goes in your mouth down to your throat. And one person over here died. No, he didn't die, but he had throat cancer, but he can't talk right now because the surgery left him where he can't talk. And so many other illnesses. When you pass by this plant, some people said that they get ear infection, the sinus act up. My daughter would pass there. She stayed in the doctor's office for sinus, for ear infections. And then there's another plant, an ammonia plant, right next to the Sunshine Bridge where I live. And when you pass there, you can smell that ammonia. If something happened, you are dead. If there's an explosion and that ammonia get into your lungs, and we live in a time bomb because the LDQ don't regulate these plants. They do what they want to do. They pollute the air, they pollute the water. They have benzene in our drinking water. So we need to educate the public, first of all, on what's going on. And then they would see what's going on. They would get on board with us to fight these industries and to hold them accountable. Because if we don't do these things, more people are going to die. More people are getting sick. And we all will be gone if no one help us and the federal government don't come down on LDQ to make them do their job. I don't know if they know how to do their job. Sometimes I think that somebody appoint them, put them in office, and they just do whatever they want, or they do nothing. Because we've been polluting this air been polluting us for years. And people that's pregnant, sometimes the baby, they have miscarriages, and sometimes when they have the baby are preemies. Those chemicals are in their body during pregnancy. So we need to find a system where the people in the community would have a say-so in the policy making. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And like I said, as a person that's me and Ms. Sharon live in the same state from different parts of the different communities, but same state, and me visiting everyone else's community on the call, and these are things that I've seen on the ground firsthand, and gotten to speak with the residents there and community members there. And this echoes beyond just the folks in this call. This echoes across their communities and very loudly and clearly these concerns and what they think are positive pathways. As we know, over the last 2.5 years, numerous government environmental justice initiatives have been announced and implemented. However, there's a disconnect between government and communities itself, which continues to be a barrier. As we see this kind of grow more and more, we are kind of faced with the question of, what is the best way of addressing these barriers, and how environmental justice communities can have better access to some of the funding. Phil, can you speak on some of the funding opportunities that have been present over the past couple of years, and then I'll have a question for the panelists.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, there are a number of opportunities. Most of the funding is coming either through EPA or through Department of Energy. So the EPA had a number of initiatives, either through regular appropriations or through the Inflation Reduction Act or the Infrastructure Bill, including $3 billion for environmental justice community block grants, $8 billion in grants for disadvantaged communities and low-income communities, $190 million for that fence line monitoring that Ms. Sharon was talking about. When we talk about disconnects, it's I suppose great that $130 million to have $130 million increase in enforcement for EPA, but it's not nearly what they asked for, and it's not nearly what they need. because the whole idea around EPA is that most of the enforcement will be happening at the state and local level. But as we've heard over and over again, that's often not happening in the way that the communities need it to happen. At the same time, the Department of Energy is including community benefits plans in everything that they're funding now, pretty much. So whether it's hydrogen hubs for research and development, or new manufacturing facilities, or other types of programs that they're funding, community benefits plans are an incredibly important element of that. And those require meaningful engagement. So not just the kind of engagement where you sit around and listen to people talk, but the kind of engagement that Maria was talking about, where these turn into agreements, where there's certain benefits that are set aside for communities that are driven by those communities, community workforce agreements to make sure that there's jobs accessible to folks, and other key elements of those plans. Again, though, as we've heard from everyone who have the lived experience on the ground, these laws and regulations are all sound good on paper, but until we see them implemented properly, a key effort here needs to be to make sure that these funds are spent correctly, and that the communities are meaningfully engaged and actually have some say. And again, that there is monitoring enforcement, whether it's monitoring enforcement of the power plants or monitoring enforcement that the money is actually flowing into the communities the way that people agreed to do it. That's the area that has me the most concerned. So I know that there's a lot of specifics that we're going to hear about from each of the panelists about some of the challenges that they have in their communities accessing the funding. But from a 10,000 foot view nationwide, my biggest concern is around, really monitoring and compliance and making sure that those funds are spent in concert with communities and really driven by those communities.
Yes, thank you, Phil. And for the panelists, this is your question. What's the most significant barrier that EJ communities face when it comes to accessing this government funding for these environmental justice initiatives that you all heard about?
So on that question, from the experience I've been on the ground, is when things begin and they begin to have some momentum, meaning that with environmental justice and this idea of energy transition as we move forward, to begin to move to carbon-free or less carbon-based power generation, or any kind of activity that's tied to that. Typically, one of the barriers is the influence that happens with initiatives like this that begin, meaning the initiatives of outreach and trying to get information and research that's utilized by outside individuals or influences, as what was mentioned earlier by Phil and by Maria, is sometimes you get folks that think they understand what those impacts are in local communities. So when things begin to move along and it gets up to the higher level, to where leaders determine that we're going to make these resources available for this purpose, in this case, such as the Navajo Nation, which is, again, a sovereign entity, the difficulties that exist are the framework of federal policy. And it does get complex, it does get complicated, because realistically, it probably doesn't fit the timeline that gets implemented, meaning, the resources are there, but, the challenges internally with the Navajo Nation and its government to try to utilize that, it is really unlikely. It's not that they aren't able to do that. It's just a number of factors that have to happen and steps that have to happen in order to utilize funding like that for development. But again, the bureaucratic process internally, the bureaucratic process for, as what was mentioned, is monitoring and ensuring those dollars get utilized in that purpose, it gets difficult. It gets difficult for sovereign nations. So I think that in itself is one thing: is how do you change federal policy to allow for some flexibility? And I'll turn it back over.
Thank you so much, Phil. Me, Pete. Maria, can you go?
Yes, of course. In terms of accessing government funding, there's a lot of barriers in the way. I mean, trust is one of them, right? Communities don't trust the government. It's hard for them to access the funding. But before trust is probably, we don't even know the funding opportunities because they are on. I mean, what do the agencies do? They post them on their websites, and then it's kind of like social circles replicating themselves, right? So like, if communities have been disconnected from federal funding for so long, it's difficult to know what are the funding cycles, when are they published, where are they published, right? Like, I think that's all information that's taken for granted, and we need to do a lot more work there, especially now that there are more funding opportunities. Even when I think to the EPA, like the pass-through grant, that I think that has a lot of possibility because hopefully it'll be community-based organizations that reach out to their friends. So we're tapping into more diverse social circles, right? And community circles. So I think that awareness is key, and we can't do the same old because it didn't work. That's why we're in the mess we're in. And then we do need to move on the other side of it is once people are aware of the opportunity, we need to build trust. Agencies that really want to connect with communities need to understand that there is not distrust without reason. Communities have been given, since the beginning of this country, reasons to not trust the government. I mean, this government has been responsible for genocide and enslavement. That is no small. We cannot ignore history and then just say, well, there's an opportunity now, let's do it. Especially not when the opportunities are coming from the agencies who have allowed our communities to become toxic and polluted and who have not stepped in to our defense or protection. And so we need to take that relationship building very seriously. I understand that there are good people in government. I want there to be good people in government, but once you step into those roles, you need to understand that additional task of holding the weight of history in order to connect with communities in an authentic way. I mean, our communities can read through community presentations that are not deep and meaningful. And so, there's a lot more to be said on that. But I also welcome, and I think a lot of communities welcome the opportunity to build with bureaucrats and federal agencies and anybody who wants to help out, right? And continue this education process of what are the things that need to be done. But they require direct community to agency relationships for those to be built, just the way that agencies have built those relationships with industry. They see industry as their stakeholders, but the number one stakeholder should have always been community, and we need to work towards making sure it is communities that are the number one stakeholders when it comes to federal agencies, because they are funded by taxpayer money, and so they should serve the taxpayers, not the people who get the tax breaks, which are the industries at the moment.
Thank you so much, Maria. And Ms. Sharon.
Well, that's wonderful what Maria and Pete said. I would like to expound on that a little bit. It's a lot of money that's coming down from the federal government, especially the Justice 40 money. And I was told that we have to get together with industry to write grants and try to compromise with them to get that money. And I feel like, why should we have to sit at the table with the enemy, with the people that's poisoning us, that's killing us, to come to some agreement to get the money? We need help. We need to get that money ourselves and not have to sit down with them to get the money. We have a lot to do and we have a lot to fight. And if we want to fight the enemy, why should we get together and do a grant with them? So I totally disagree with that. When I found out about that, I didn't think that I was reading it wrong. And they explained to me that that's the way it is. And so we were planning a meeting with the governor's office today, but it's going to be rescheduled to come together to sit down and talk with them, the frontline leaders of these organizations, to come together and put something together in a grant so that we can get the money. And the organization that's in this grant, they would get so much for whatever project they want to do and so forth. So I think we're just spinning our wheels because we sitting at the table with the enemies, the people that's poisoning us, people that's killing us, that don't want to clean the water. They still want the industry to dump the chemicals in our drinking water. So I don't feel like that's going to be productive. I'm going to sit with them, but I don't see where that's going to be productive. That's not helping us. When we're fighting the enemies, then we have to sit at the table with them, to compromise with them. And they also told us if we see something wrong that they are putting into this grant, we should let them know. So we have to do a lot to try to save our lives and to save our air and our water and our soil. So we shouldn't have to do their jobs. These laws should come down more in favor of saving people's lives, not saving the industry that's polluting us, that's harming us, that's killing us. So they just like to put the people on the back burner and to give the authorities to these industries. So I disagree with that, but we have to do whatever we have to do to try to save our communities. A whole bunch of us, we're fighting, and we're fighting for our lives. Industry is not fighting for their lives because they don't care. They come here and dump the filth on us. We have to breathe this stuff 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And they dump the stuff mostly on the weekends when we are, I guess, when a lot of people think that people are sleeping, they dump the filth in our drinking water and they pollute the air even more. When we had our Hurricane Ida, the oil spilled over the tanks and we saw it and we reported it. And industry don't care. They didn't even try to help the people rebuild their homes. They gave people tarps to put on their roofs. So we don't need them. We can find ways to live without industries. The industries are poisoning us. They are not our friend. The federal government is not our friend because they're not trying to protect us. And I'm tired. My community is suffering and we are dying. We need to form strategists. Rise St. James have the chemical of the month to educate the public on what's going on in our community. So many people commend us for doing that because industry tried to hide what they are doing. We put things in the paper and they do a rebuttal to make it look like they are not the enemies. So it's a hard fight, but we're going to continue to fight. That's all I can say.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sharon. That's very well said. And as we know, we're talking with very different communities that face different levels of pollution, different barriers, different factors. And I'll ask this question. Is there a way, how can government agencies and policymakers particularly better prioritize how to allocate funds that address the direct needs and the unique needs of your communities as opposed to going about it in one blanket type of way? And I'll start with Pete.
Okay, that's a good question. And I think one is understanding and respecting sovereignty and knowing that these communities that exist and what the challenges are, what the barriers are, and knowing that how funding is utilized. And it was a good example. What Maria said is, funding cycles are a little bit different, timelines are a little bit different, even the bureaucracy is a little bit different. Maybe if there was more of a, what the word's been used is, like tribal consultation would be one. One of the things that the state of New Mexico has is a Tribal Collaboration Act. They attempt to work with tribal entities as best as they can, especially when it is related to funding that the state of New Mexico provides to tribes. They're one of the few that created a Indian Affairs Department with a secretary level position. And again, I think those are examples as, those are ways to maybe try to try to get to that point to where these initiatives can help tribal nations. And at the federal level, at some point, is there going to be something in place other than DOI, Department of Interior, where you elevate tribal nations? You consider tribal nations a sovereign. It's like another country. So when at some point maybe that kind of conversation happens between leaders and leadership, and that understanding, and then really knowing where some of those needs can be addressed or directed in order to use them as the way they were intended. I mean, it would be a heavy lift, difficult challenge, but I think of it that way, in that example that currently exists with the state of New Mexico. So I'll turn it back over.
Thank you so much, Pete. Maria?
Yeah, where can the money go? I mean, there's so many places for the money to go. I'll keep saying it though. Enforcement is going to be key to adjust our needs. And I think if there is going to be more community engagement, then community-based organizations need to be resourced in order to do that engagement. Like Michelle was saying, right now, the way the Department of Energy is doing their community benefits agreements require us, if we're going to be resourced, we have to write the grant with industry. That's producing a conflict of interest at the foundation. It is so problematic that is the way that has been chosen. It doesn't provide for a real discussion, on not a public discourse on if a project should go ahead or not. To tie community organizational funding to industry and to have us on the same application. You have organizations then that don't know what's going on. You wouldn't ask an organization that runs playgrounds to give advice on healthcare. That's not something you would do. But because of the way DOE has done it, it's putting organizations that maybe they work on workforce development, maybe they work on other things in community, but that does not make them positioned to be able to do community engagement on, energy projects. And so, first off, not categorizing community engagement and having specific qualifications is inappropriate. And then tying our funding to the industry that might need to be pushed back on, maybe it needs to be supported, but we should be able to have an independent opinion, not have our funding tied together. So any project or any policy that's requiring people to be at the table, that wants to have community meetings, those things are important, but they have to be resourced. And I'm tired of our organization being asked for so long to do them for free, as if, like somehow we're the rich folks or something, but we should do them for free. But meanwhile, the agencies and industries utilize a whole host of consultants that are paid appropriate amounts of money for their work. Their work is validated, it's seen, and it's compensated. But then our work has to be volunteer and bootstrapped, and it's inappropriate, and it's been setting up our communities for decades. And I think we're just continuing in that fashion, and we need to break that status quo so that we can have real democratic discourse, which I think it is what the moment is requiring us. When I think about the future of energy, of the energy systems in this country, it's going to take all of us talking. And for that to happen, and for our communities to bring people who have distrust of government to the table, we need the proper resources to be able to make that happen. So I'll leave it there and pass it to Ms. Sharon.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Yes, you said a lot of things I would want to repeat, but I'm not going to repeat it. But I think that I don't know, we need to find another way to save our communities. I think that we should speak up a little bit more, make more noise, let people know that this is our community, and we shouldn't let them dictate to us what we should do. And if they want to build these chemical plants in our community, turn it back on them and let them build it in their communities. Let us have a say-so in our own communities, what would go there. And I don't know, the laws need to be changed. We need to vote these politicians out who are not for us. We need reparation for the people who died because of these industries that's polluting our areas. We need them to see that whenever a chemical plant or industry want to come into a community, why they always put it in the poor Black and brown community? Why not put it in the rich white communities? Because the rich have money and they can give whatever politician or whatever, and they would vote in their favor. So why are we always the dumping ground? We need some kind of compensation or reparation for what's been going on all of these years. And we also need to have laws that will protect our grave sites, our cemeteries of our loved ones, because it's a law that you're not supposed to build an industry right next to a cemetery. Our parish officials let them do it. I don't know how they go around the law, but they do it. And I think we need to stand a little bit taller and come together, form coalitions, and fight against all of these things that's not in our favor, because we are dying. We're steadily dying. We need more people to stand up and speak up and stop being so afraid of these politicians and these industries. We can't do it all by ourselves. We need to come together as a coalition, as a group, to fight back at them, because they are killing us. So what are we going to lose? Let's fight back at them. Let's get them.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sharon. And I'll transition now, and I'll actually just say that, like I said, these EJ communities have significant challenges, but it really doesn't define these communities. Instead, even with my time visiting and going and having conversations with community members, you learn about the vibrant culture that these communities have, and how much these people care about the quality of life they deserve and they're owed in general. So with that, I'm going to transition. I want to ask if we have any questions or Q&A from the viewers, and we'll take questions now. Okay, well, while we wait for a question, I'll actually ask, for the panelists, can you guys kind of speak to what role advocacy plays in breaking down these barriers and creating the new pathways that you guys have all formed in the context of your environmental justice work? Because you guys have done incredible work, had some incredible wins and successes, and I just kind of wanted to make sure that's highlighted, for everyone. So we'll start with the same order. We'll go Pete, Maria, Ms. Sharon.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the question. I think as far as advocacy is having an understanding of the community and how its relation to the activity. I found that very beneficial. Maybe part of that's based upon experience and understanding that, and understanding, the culture that exists and the communities that exist. Navajo Nation is pretty large, so our communities are pretty divided. And again, one of the things, understanding that with environmental justice and things moving along, I think it's really understanding and looking for that balance, because there's still that connection with the industry activity that's nearby. And it's a good example. Some of the challenges or experiences that other folks in other communities may have had are not similar, but again, there are concerns about how we all move forward with this, because at some point we do have to change, and we do have to adjust. Part of that, I hope, is that there are opportunities that will be out there. Maybe technology has an answer to all of this, but again, in engaging the communities is really just in the advocacy, is being open-minded, but again, just continuing to be out there and meet with folks, because in the end, it's our community. That's where we live, and it's important to us. And one of the things that was mentioned is we all want that quality of life, and we have to answer that question: is what is it? What is it that we want and we can do to ensure that it's done in a way to where it's fair and we're environmentally responsible. And I appreciate all the comments and thoughts today.
Thank you so much. Maria?
Yeah, advocacy. I mean, advocacy is just community dreaming, right? And we're just trying to make it real. Yeah, I think it's important for communities to keep speaking up about what's wrong and understanding that sometimes it's not just speaking up. 'Cause, we say what it is, but it hasn't always changed in things. We also have to go to where power is concentrated and start taking some of our own power back, right, as communities. And that's what advocacy helps. It helps kind of see the pathways where we need to give communities more power and make sure that the ideals that folks will profess, that we hold them accountable to that, to making that real. And as long as it's not real, we have to keep signaling the hypocrisies, right? I think folks want, we all have an innate desire to be the best versions of ourselves. But if communities don't point out where institutions are failing us, then, I just always think about, I'm going to make sure no one thinks I wanted this or that I supported what's going on, even if it doesn't change in my lifetime. Because I also understand that this is long-term work about the world we want to leave behind for our grandchildren's and next generations. It's not just about us not here now.
Thank you so much. Ms. Sharon?
Well, this advocacy work has consumed my life. This is personal to me. When before I started doing this and found out about all the chemicals that's in the air and in our water, we had a wonderful community. It was just like living a life of Raleigh. We had everything. We had trees, pecan trees, fruit trees. We had livestock. We had everything, and we weren't sick. We didn't realize that these plants were the reason why we were going to the doctor so often until we started noticing that we had 12 within a 10-mile radius. And we started noticing so many funerals every week. And we didn't understand. Then we started to find out from some of the workers at the plants and some of the politicians. And the people won't speak up. So I just know that I'm the voice for my community. And all we want to do is breathe clean air, drink clean water, and have a productive soil again. Our pecan trees don't bear. This year, I saw 1 or 2 pecans. Last year, none. And the fruit trees died. Orange trees died. Fig trees died. We don't have a post office. They sold our high school. We don't have a sugar mill like we had when I was younger. We don't have anything anymore because it was told that this area would be all industry. When I was teaching school, we had meetings and we were told that in the meetings, they want to make this, but it didn't ring a bell to me because I didn't know we were dying from industry until we found out. And that's why we're fighting. And this is personal to me, and I'm going to continue to fight. I devoted my life to do the work that I'm doing. And I'd be darned if industry destroy us anymore. No more is coming in here. I can promise you that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sharon. Very well said for everyone on the call. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all of our wonderful panelists. Always remember, you can be a voice in your community, in any walk of life. If you care about your community, you can care just as much as the people on this call and be out there fight and advocate, for your quality of life that you're owed. Thanks so much, and hope you guys all have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Ms. Sharon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.